We're just shy of 80% of all Ontarians being fully vaccinated. And I think that's one of the highest vaccination community rates in the entire world. I lost track during the pandemic of how many grandparents told me, I'm getting vaccinated for my grandchildren, both to see them and to keep them safe. It's what is probably typically Canadian fashion. We are willing to do something that we might not otherwise do or like if we sense that it's going to help the wider good. Paul's problem in writing to the church at Corinth, and as you heard the text this morning, is that they only believed in themselves. The common good was out of the question for them. My opinion, my advancement, those were the things that were critical to the Corinthians. And where did that all lead them? It led them to conflict. Because putting oneself ahead of everybody else often leads to conflict. A community to which Paul wrote that was torn apart by divisions. Paul's answer, though, was simple. There is a better way, he says. Love. Love that never ends. The toughest question I think I thought about this week was, why is it so hard to love? Why is hate so easy to generate? Why is it so easy to think less of someone else, somebody who's different from us? Why does hate just seem to grow and fester when it's left unchecked? In the midst of the U.S. civil rights movement, hate was abundant, as it is today. And when the black churches were being bombed and police dogs set on protesters and crowds being beaten with batons, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King preached what I think was one of his greatest sermons, in which he said, you can bomb us, you can beat us, but we still love you. We will love you forever. We may not like what you do to us, but we will love you. And sadly, it is easier to hate. And King died from an assassin's bullet. We live today in an economy in which things are no longer built to last. Our last fridge only made it to 2.5 years, and the repair guy said, going to cost more to fix this thing than to buy a new one. And then, in the midst of the pandemic, as you know, we had to take the only available fridge in the warehouse or wait for some undetermined time for a new one. The line which really caught me this week in Paul's letter to the Corinthians was his claim that love never ends. If you were raised in the King James Version of the Bible era, you would remember this line as being, love never faileth. As if it never has an end point. Love never stops, even when we stop. Love doesn't quit, even when the going gets tough. Love endures beyond the boundaries of this life's day. Love never ends. And yet in this COVID time, we're deeply aware of the finality that's all around us. Over 33,000 Canadians have died from COVID. And life expectancy has actually fallen to its lowest level in the last 20 years in most countries around the world. So we know endings. And Paul wanted the Corinthians, wanted us, to remember that unlike all of our finalities, love, God's love for each one of you and for every one of us, never fails, never ends. I think one of my favorite Stuart McLean stories was about a pub. I think it was in Montreal, where they couldn't get the taps on the draft beer spigots to stop. They went and turned off the power. They took out the hinges, they turned off the CO2 canister, and the beer just kept coming. So they had to run out into the streets in his story and beckon people to come in and have a beer. It just wouldn't stop. And God's love for us, for Bentley, for our children, for our parents, our partners, our siblings, our friends, our neighbors. Won't stop. Never fails, never ends. And a world where everything seems to be programmed to fail, to come to an end, to never last very long. It's a hope that we can hold on to, that God's love will always be there for us. When I was in my early teens, my father got up early every Sunday morning to drive me to the next town over to play hockey. And honestly, I don't know how he did it. Sunday was his only morning off, and he was never quite fully awake on the drive, and the only redeeming factor for him was that the arena had a small little coffee stand which, remarkably, was open at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning. That kind of love in action, that sacrificing love of a parent for a child, is love. And it's how I imagined the love that Paul tells the Corinthians to practice. The Corinthians, you see, they're guided only by their narrow own self-interests. No one was going to drive a kid on their morning to sleep in to the town next over. The love that Paul speaks about, though, is the kind that one commentator says seeks not its own good, but the good of the one who is loved. Love is all about asking, how can I seek your good? How can I get the best result for you? How can I make this whole community better through my actions and the actions of others? How can I improve the good for all who live here and care for everyone in this place? And then we begin to learn how to love. Paul had this rather radical and I think unshakable belief that love for the other, if you practiced it in every relationship, would have ended the conflict in Corinth. Because without love, he said, we're just like a clanging old cymbal that makes a lot of noise, but doesn't really make the people or the world around us any better. I was thinking of a church council meeting we held one night at Glencairn United where I was the minister. And one member I remember, she was vehemently opposed to the views of everyone else on the council on this particular issue. And we spent a long time wrangling about it. But then she said, if everyone else was supportive of the idea going ahead, she would give it her support as well. And she did. She didn't hold up the project. She never bad-mouthed it in private. And for all the congregation knew, she was well and truly behind it. And that, I think, took love. Love which puts what's best for everybody else ahead of my own view. And that's the kind of love that Paul prayed and hoped might be among the Corinthians, and that we might hope and pray will be among our community, our country, our neighbors, and around the world. Because we have faith indeed that the one thing about love is that love never fails. Love will truly never end. Thanks be to God. Amen.